The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, folks, and I appreciate the early bird signing on a little bit early. Um, we'll begin right on time at the top of the hour, but I wanted to remind everybody that we do have Q&A at the end of the broadcast, and you'll see in your drop-down a place where you can type in your questions. So if you wanted to do that ahead of time or anytime during the broadcast, we'd welcome that. So we'll hold tight for another couple of minutes um, and start in about 2 and 2. All right, we're just about 1 minute away from start, and when we start, you'll hear the easy listening music go away. It's royalty free, so that's kind of slim pickings. It's better than dead air, not by much, but a little bit. So as we roll into the top of the hour, we will transition. All right, folks, let's begin. We're still seeing a good amount of people roll in, um, but I wanted to start on time. Uh, we will be going through a sort of look back at 2022, and then also a look forward at what's happening now that'll affect what goes on in our industry in 2023 and forward. But first, I want to take a minute to thank everybody for taking time out of their day to spend some time with me so I can chat with you folks about this industry. I'm very humbled. We have set another record in attendees, and that is very humbling. So I really appreciate it. Um, and we are seeing quite an influx. I love watching the ticker tick up as we launch into it. Um, so let's get started real quick. Um, One of the things that I wanted to do is look at some signs of what's happening in the future to kind of give us a barometer for what we'll see in 2023. And the first thing I wanted to do is look at the tool makers that are supplying stamping equipment and other components for auto manufacturers. They are seeing this incredible increase in new business orders placed by the manufacturers. So we're looking at what will be potentially a 13% compound annual growth rate for the next 2 years. Um, that is a really good sign because the last 3 years we've been dealing with COVID, and that tooling ordering, the stamping and creation of large components for production of automobiles has been on the downward curve for the last few years, but it is now ramping up pretty rapidly, and that's a sign that the redesigns and variations of some pretty big production products like full-size pickups, SUVs, all the top sellers, is heading in a positive direction. So that is really a good sign. Now, people say, well, does that mean that the shortage of microchips is over? And unfortunately, it does not. Um, Really, there is no good news yet for microchips. The auto industry says we will still lose about 2 to 3 million units of global production in 2023 from anticipated rates. The interesting piece of this, though, is that automakers have allocated the microchips, the semiconductors, to higher margin, more expensive vehicles. So if you have a limited supply of these things, you're going to want to put them in your top margin vehicles and your more expensive vehicles. The problem is that not only escalates the average price of a new vehicle, but it also eliminates those under $30,000 vehicles that affects a lot of folks. And that is what sort of bled out into the record increases in used vehicle prices. So we're not seeing a normalization of the market just yet. I think there is one positive sign in that Taiwanese Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation has invested. They originally invested 12 billion, but now they've upped it to $40 billion in two plants in Arizona. Siemens Corporation is also looking at expanding a microchip plant in West Lafayette, Indiana. So there is some infrastructure improvements that are going to improve the situation overall. So not great news short term, but there is significant investment. You know, we had the CHIPS Act passed that allows for tax breaks and infrastructure investment. So we will get through this, but it will take time. You know, as I mentioned, the unfortunate impact of this is that used vehicle prices overall have gone up for vehicles, and that plays out in the average monthly payment. If you look at the jump in prices, it's 11.8% for new vehicles, the increase in car payments. Now, with interest rates at 7%, doesn't take a mathematician to realize that's an inflation rate beyond just the increase in inflation for the interest rate. It is also the cost of the car going up. 18.2% increase for used vehicles, 15.4% increase for leased vehicles. Puts some pretty high monthly car payments on the books at 644, 488 for used, and surprisingly, leased vehicles at 531, highest it's ever been. Prices, as I mentioned, are big. New vehicle prices up 12.2%, but more importantly, used vehicle car and truck prices at more than 40% increase. That is really scary. So that rolls into the average borrowing rate for a new vehicle. It's $39,721.27 and change, 27,000 and change for used vehicles. Auto loan debt is, you know, always high up there in the debt category, and it is now third behind student loans, which is another scary thing. But it is an amazing amount of debt that is financed. So on average, Americans are taking out more than $60 billion in new car loans each month. And with interest rates up, we see longer terms for loans as well. So last year, 15.2% of new and 7.5% of used car buyers opted for an 84-month loan. At the end of 2022, however, 1 in 5, so just over 20% of new car buyers signed an 84-month loan term. And the reason we bring this up is that the longer the loan term is, the more that these vehicle owners will potentially be underwater. It is difficult when you have a total loss to settle those loans. And most of those folks with interest rates at 7% will be paying on those vehicles for many years to be in a positive equity situation. And I apologize, that skipped ahead. And the interesting thing is the majority of 84-month loans are being taken on lower priced vehicles, with one Miami, Florida Hyundai dealer saying that 65% of their new vehicle loans are 84 months. This is going to put us in a pretty interesting situation as the US car market starts to normalize and vehicle values start to stabilize or fall. That's going to make those total losses that much more difficult to settle. So an interesting thing is I wanted to take a look, and this one actually surprised me. So this is the percentage of residents in a state paying more than $1,000 a month for a single car note. So your monthly payment is more than $1,000. And surprisingly, I would have bet money that it was going to be California or Texas. They are, up there, Texas being second, but the highest frequency of people with more than $1,000 monthly loan rate is the great state of Wyoming. Uh, I guess that's a lot of King Ranch Platinums running around the great state of Wyoming, but that is really surprising. So, I mean, think about your monthly loan terms. If you do have a loan on a car, most of us do. Uh, that is really a shocking dollar amount. And one of the interesting things is that the market has changed fairly rapidly. One of the darlings of COVID was Carvana. Carvana featured in sort of the perfect solution to COVID restrictions. You had touchless car buying. You had the vehicle either at the vending machine or dropped off by the truck. Now, the shocking thing is that their share prices have spiraled downward 97% this year. That is, they are weeks away in my mind for a reorganization through bankruptcy. The interesting thing is, right at the height of 2022, when they were losing money on a per transaction basis, they decided that they were going to go big and purchase ADESA Auto Auctions for $2.2 billion. This also right after the Q1 of 2022, where they were losing an average of $3,255 for each vehicle sold. And their situation is only going to get worse. They have about $8 billion in total debt as of September 30th last year, according to Bloomberg, and that's increased more than the 2.2 billion that they spent for ADESA. So they are at a critical moment. They have had their license to sell cars suspended or revoked for 30, 60, and 90 days in a handful of states, and it is around what the various AGs are calling the deceptive trade practices around um, titling. So they are buying vehicles from sellers without a clear title or a delay in getting that loan paid off. And so there are a lot of Carvana purchasers with temp tags that expired. The difficult situation is that with used car prices falling, Carvana is really going to struggle to ever get out of this negative situation where they lose money on every car because they purchased a ton of their inventory at record high prices. And now that we're seeing signs of a softening market, it is really, really going to be difficult for them. And their major competitor, Vroom, isn't far behind. Vroom went public in mid 2020, and they raised 468 million on their initial public offering. But in the last 12 months, so again, concurrent with the decline of Carvana, we see a huge decline in the value of Vroom as well. And Texas, actually, the Texas Attorney General is suing them over deceptive trade practices. Again, significant delays in titling, and surprisingly, Texas pushed through what was sort of unique to Vroom. As they're headquartered in Texas, they were able to issue multiple 30-day temp tags, irrespective of where the vehicle was purchased. They could do it on a Texas tag. The state of Texas thought that that was abuse of the system. They have changed that. So there are several uh, broom owners, vehicle owners, who have temp tags that expired and they cannot get a replacement in their particular state where they're residents of. So it is really a difficult situation. Now, the other interesting that I wanted to bring to light is and most of you have probably heard of the Kia Boys Challenge, and I did spell it with an S because I refused to spell boys with a Z. But the Kia Boys Challenge is both on TikTok and on YouTube, and it showcases uh, how easy it is to steal a Kia or Hyundai of a certain vintage. Um, these things happen uh, for 2011 through 2021 Kias, most models without the push button start, and also Hyundai models 2015 to 21 to 2021. To give you an idea of the increase in theft rates, Chicago saw a 700% increase in Kia Hyundai thefts since August of 2021, right around the time when the first Kia Boy Challenge went out on TikTok. Minneapolis PD reported a 1,300% increase of Kias and Hyundais. And in St. Louis, just under half of all the motor vehicle thefts reported in 2022 were for Kia and Hyundai vehicles. Um, Now, interestingly enough, the prior year, Kia Hyundai was only 7% of thefts in metropolitan St. Louis. Really, really scary. Now, Milwaukee, where the Kia Boys original video was filmed, two-thirds of the vehicles stolen in 2021 through July were Hyundai and Kia models. So what is going on here? Now, the interesting thing is how incredibly easy it is to steal a Hyundai or a Kia. You basically need a flathead screwdriver and the ability to break the window. Um, and then you can see a USB cable. The USB port connector is a perfect fit for the ignition switch behind the tumbler. So you break the window, you pull the bottom plastic piece off of the steering column, you use the flathead to just pop off the key cylinder, and you have access. And that USB port fits directly over and allows you to turn on the vehicle with no steering lock in effect. Um, as I said, they're the non-push button vehicles. The interesting thing is that it has become deadly. To give you an idea, during this time period, 96% of other vehicles sold from 2015 to 2019, so covering the Hyundai vehicles, were equipped with immobilizers, but only 26% of Hyundais and Kias were at that time because most of them uh, featured key start, and I just showed you that example of how easy it is to defeat that key start without an immobilizer or software. Several large insurance companies now have announced that they will no longer write newer policies on these vehicles, and others are restricting coverage in major cities where the theft rates, some of those cities that I pointed out, are the highest. In Buffalo, New York, you see that there was a quadruple fatality related to a Kia Challenge. There were six teenagers driving in the stolen Kia and crashed and fatally injured four of the occupants of the vehicle. Now, both automakers, Kia and Hyundai, say they are developing software for these vehicles that are not initially equipped with an immobilizer. Hyundai said they're both going to give it out for free as it becomes available in the next couple of months. The issue is, do these potential thieves understand if the vehicle's been upgraded or not? So you may not be able to start the vehicle, but you're going to do about 90% of the damage of the theft. You're going to break the window, you're going to peel the bottom of the column, you're going to pop out the lock cylinder, and then not be able to start the vehicle. So the thief would potentially leave it, but you have still incurred that type of damage. So it's going to take a little while for the rash to normalize. Switching subjects completely, we're going to focus on one of the impact areas that we saw impacting aftermarket parts, and that is the cost of a standard shipping container to leave East Asia, so Republic of China, and go either to the North American West Coast, Port of Los Angeles, or the East Coast. So you saw some pretty significant decreases from October through January of 2023. That is a relief for a lot of suppliers of aftermarket parts. They are able to retain. Now, most of these guys were on a year-long agreement with their shipping container suppliers for that 60-day round trip rental. But it is good news that these shipping prices have returned to normal. Now, one of the things that I wanted to look at are the impact of these sort of external factors to the parts supply. And I put out something of a provocative headline here. Is parts supply the future of a smooth parts supply? Is it really now up to the unions? And the reason I say that is that the International Longshore Workers Union have been working on an expired contract. That expired contract happened in July. You can see the issues that are at stake, and they are going on a month-to-month, and there is no contract to prevent them from wildcat striking or striking in general. So that could really paralyze the West Coast at a minimum. But it's not the only impact. UAW contracts with Ford, GM, and Stellantis are also set to expire in September of this year. So that could impact parts supply, stamping supply of UAW workers for these plants in the US. And then interestingly enough, the UAW has realized there is an opportunity to unionize these EV battery plants across the US. So LG Energy Solutions and General Motors did a joint venture called Ultimum Cells, LLC. And the UAW went in, and really the vote was overwhelming in Warren, Ohio, 710 of the workers voting for unionization versus only 16 voting against it. So as we look at EVs becoming a bigger portion of the car park, this could also be a future thing to watch. And as I said, EVs are becoming a bigger part of the car park. We're now at EVs being 7% of new vehicle sales. Yours truly, I bought one back in October of this year, and I'm now fully, at least with one of my cars. The other one is a gas vehicle, but I do have a full battery electric vehicle, and it's sort of learning to adapt to the new EV lifestyle. This is just the tip. If they can convince me, if the EV community can convince me to go EV, then I'm probably one of the more difficult targets to overcome. But we will see this rapid expansion that's only limited by charging stations. Right now, charging stations are what I would say woefully behind public charging stations. Although currently EVs are only 1% of the 281 million vehicles in the market, it's going to reach roughly 40%. You see car makers, luxury divisions like Cadillac, car makers like Volvo saying they're going to be all EV by 2030. It's going to be a chunk of new vehicles. And a lot of us that have EVs are doing at-home charging, but it really does limit you, and you have range anxiety if you cannot find a ready charger across the US. To give you an idea, right now, there are 126,500 level 2 chargers. The interesting thing about the level 2 chargers is that takes still 4 to 10 hours. So these are the ones that you see at workplaces. Not the fast chargers, the level 3 charging stations. To give you an idea, level 3 can fully charge an empty battery electric vehicle in about 30 minutes. And I am seeing some uh, questions coming in now. I will save those all. I am watching and taking a tally. Um, so we're going to answer all of the questions at the end. I appreciate you asking during, but I can keep this rhythm up. So we'll have more than enough time to go through the questions and answer them appropriately at the end of the slides. So please keep submitting the questions. Um, so again, we only have about 20,000 level 3 public charging stations across the US so far. That doesn't count the superchargers and Tesla destination chargers, which is about another 16.8. Those, according to Elon Musk, will be available for non-Teslas. Um, and they're going to do a second charging port. Again, the chart over on the right shows you the difference in charging around the world. EU is absolutely unified, but the US is not really. So Tesla chargers, superchargers do not fit without an adapter that you can buy on Amazon, but it's a little bit challenging. We really, really need to get the chargers in place before we go too much longer. The interesting thing is, though, with EVs that a lot of folks may not have considered is that in cold weather, it's right at 15 degrees today um, in Salt Lake City, and the range, to sort of paraphrase George Costanza, there is shrinkage when it's cold. Uh, my Volkswagen ID4 has a range of about 240 on in regular days. Um, but when it's cold, I get between 170 and 180 miles in total range. The other thing that impacts that, if you're running the vehicle heater, that of course zaps energy and reduces that range even further. Um, so um, that is where we're at with that. The interesting thing is that Elon Musk is feeling a little heat from other car manufacturers eating into his market share. So they have made a pretty significant cut. And here is the new price versus the old price for Teslas. This happened in December, that there was a pretty significant, and if you look at the Model Y, um, it's around 13% cut in price, which is pretty significant, about a 20% cut for the Model Y and the Model Y extended range. The interesting thing is that people that bought one right before the price drop say they really do feel cheated. And the problem is that you're going to see that same difficult to settle a total loss on the Tesla, as the replacement vehicles will have a lower MSRP. So you potentially would have people that are in a negative equity situation with their Tesla because they financed the higher price vehicle at 20% higher in some cases than it is now. So one long range Model Y owner, for example, ordered his Tesla late last year, got a call from the dealer right before Christmas saying, hey, your car came in, which he took delivery of, paying $69,000. And literally 3 days later, that vehicle fell in value $12,000 because of the price lowering. Now, the interesting thing is that the Mach-E is also seeing a price cut. The top of the line Mach-E GT extended range all-wheel drive has been lowered by $5,900. The rear-wheel drive standard Mach-E about $900 to $1,000. So we're starting to see the impact of competition from Hyundai Ioniq, from Volkswagen ID4, and some of the others. They're really, really altering their prices to gain market share. And here is our poll. I wanted to introduce a quick poll, keep everybody awake. And so go ahead and um, take the next minute or so, and we will go over our poll. So which common feature is not found on EVs? Is it A, heated seats, B, adaptive cruise, C, AM radio reception, or D, an opening sunroof? So we will take a minute for folks to answer, and we will get our responses. So we'll leave it open for just a couple more minutes. And we have some good responses so far. And we've got, I appreciate it. Pretty much everybody who is listening in is responding. I do appreciate that. And so we are now getting close to critical mass here. So we're going to leave it open for a couple more seconds. But which is it? Can I fool you guys? And okay, so we are going to close out the poll. The really interesting thing is that I couldn't fool you. 58% correctly identified AM radio reception as something that is not available in EVs. Second place, 21% guessed an opening sunroof. There are some Teslas available with opening sunroofs and some other EVs. But it is AM radio reception. Now, interestingly enough, you can, and Tesla has figured out a way to digitize the AM signal and send it through an HD FM, so that if you're interested in conservative radio or sports talk, you can still tune in on AM radio. But it is not true AM radio reception, because the battery, as it's powering the motor, has incredible feedback. And makes it unlistenable. So there's your trivia for today, folks. All right. And there we go. There's my AM radio. And bonus points to anybody who can write in the questions what radio this vehicle belongs to. All right, so we're going to wrap up with a look at parts performance, and then I'm going to answer your questions as they come in. So we're going to look at delivery days in our standard dashboard that we provide to all of our customers on industry delivery days. We're going to look at the average part price per part by part type, and then our market basket index, our parts trader collision parts price index, and show you where it's been in 2022 and so far in the start of 2023. So to begin with, we look at the median delivery days, and the reason we do this over looking at an average is that medians with two standard deviations weigh the outliers. So if you had 12 parts on the average estimate and you got 11 in the same day and one you got 15 days later, if you average that, it wouldn't stand out. So to look at the impact of the outliers, we look at the median plus two standard deviations, and that captures roughly 95% of the parts that are found in a collision repair estimate. So starting up on the upper left to look at the bars, some good news here. So far in January 2023, that was as of yesterday, I pulled these numbers, the median delivery days plus two standard deviations was the lowest it had been in 12 months, which is really good news. At 13.6 days, you can see the blue bar has been pretty significantly at about 1.5 days. So again, you could get 11 of those 12 parts in 1.5 days, but that one part that was delayed or back ordered is what's causing that 13.6 days. Looking over at the upper right, this is vehicles by market share. Again, these are based on our billions of parts ordered every year. And we break it out by vehicle manufacturer, and then I'm going to split it out later in just a few slides by part type. But the interesting thing is here, Honda is actually down significantly at 18.7 days. So that is a good indication that they are getting better at fulfilling those new OE part orders. Mazda still is an outlier at 26.3, Acura at 26.5. So we do have some issues. Looking at the lower right, you can see we have some sort of pale red. So again, the darker the red, the bigger the delays. So you can see that South Dakota has the biggest delays of all the 50 or all the 48 states, I should say. North Dakota next, and then um, Arizona and New Mexico, but the rest of the states in some shades of blue. Now, really, this is driven by the OEs. The OEs are at a distinct um, disadvantage, we'll call it, excuse me, because they don't have the luxury of producing and delivering just the highest demand parts. They are required to produce all the trim parts and deliver those. So it could be that trim piece, it could be the seat belt, it could be what have you. They have to supply it, and there are significant back orders on it. So as we split it out, you can see that we went overall median was 13.6 days. In January of 2023 for OEM only, we're looking at 15.2 days. The really interesting thing is that Honda is still um, in that sort of pale, not quite red. Um, Mazda still as somewhat of the outlier, and then some smaller brands. And the footprint that we identified in all part types on the US uh, state map is still identical to what we saw of all part types. So it is truly the OEM parts that are driving these delivery days being so high. Good news is they are getting better. You can see it coming down in 2023. As we go to the aftermarket, this is the really interesting thing. In January of 2023, we see again the lowest median delivery days at 2.9 days. It's the lowest it's been in 12 months. You can see that the average is just over 1 day. The entire US, with the exception of South Dakota, in a shade of blue, and in most cases a very dark blue. The interesting outlier here is that two domestic brands, uh, Buick and Dodge, are actually showing um, that they are significantly above the 2.9 at Dodge at 4.1 and Buick at 4.4 respectively. Let's look at recycled. And as we look at recycled parts, we can see another good story at 3.6 days. We're almost at the lowest. Again, October was 3.5, but very, very stable. The average at just over 2 days. The median plus two standard deviations at 3.6 days. Almost all the car makers are looking good. Honda a little bit outlier. You can see the one where we couldn't fit in the label, that is Mercedes-Benz and Mitsubishi. Again, most of the US, with the exception of South Dakota, in blue, and then we really don't have a lot of deliveries in Wyoming and Montana. But that is a look at where we are. I expect that uh, the OEMs will continue to improve on their delivery and reduction of backordered delayed parts. The aftermarket is in very good position, and we see the recycled parts again looking very, very healthy. Now, looking at it by average part price per part type, this points out a couple of things. We see a almost unbridled increase in remanufactured and reconditioned parts. That, folks, is mainly alloy wheels, absolutely the vast majority on alloy wheels. They are increasing in size, but we have seen sort of a systematic problem in getting refinishing technicians to man the plants to address the supply. So there is a shortage, and you see the cost of the alloy wheel remanufacturing process continue to impact the average MSRP, and it continues to go up. We see stabilization in recycled parts. It's ending up the year only slightly above what it started, north of $300. And you see, actually, interestingly, a decrease in OEM surplus parts. That is in some part due to the mix of parts. And while we talk about parts, you can see what seems to be interesting is the average part price for an OE part at 188, and then we have seen that increase in aftermarket part price from 183 to 186, and you're like, well, heck, that's only $2 difference between the OE and the aftermarket. What's the big deal? And it is really around the mix rather than the inflationary impact of the aftermarket part. It's no secret that one of the largest insurance companies in the US is opening up their parts policy to accept large plastic components like bumpers, headlamps, tail lamps. And that is really what's continuing. It's the mix of the aftermarket part and not really the inflationary impact. There is more of a sale in the parts trader platform of aftermarket bumper covers and headlights than there has been, so that is causing that part price to increase. So we are going to finish up with one last look, and that is a look at our collision parts price index. Again, this mirrors the consumer price index. What the consumer price index does is a gauge of inflation. It takes a market basket of consumer goods. For the CPI, Consumer Price Index Guide, it is a market basket of electricity, fuel, groceries, rent, medical care, et cetera, all sort of bumbled up, and they tag it inflationary rate. They set a base point at 100, and then they measure the inflationary impact. We did the same thing with the most frequently purchased collision parts. We set that market basket initial point at 100, and then you can see at December 2022, it was at 105.8. So that gives you an idea that the inflationary rate on an indexed level, again, it's all part prices, part types purchased, is it's a different look and sort of more balanced look at where our inflationary rates overall are. And so with that, I will go into the questions. And the first question off is, what will be the tipping point for Hyundai and Kia to begin recalls or refunds if too many insurers drop policies? That's a good question. I think if they are scrambling to put the software updates to sort of mimic a true immobilizer in the system, if they get that out, that could give them a little bit of a lifeline. The problem is that when a car becomes expensive to insure or harder to insure, that's going to impact the resale value, and that is an issue. Next question from Tony: any update on the Honda Civic's backorder on the left seatbelt becoming available? That is one of our most sought after parts on the platform, and that is an American supply issue. It is not, most of the Civics and most of Hondas are assembled in Ohio, and to meet Department of Transportation regulations, seatbelts have to be manufactured in the U.S., and that is a U.S. problem. And they are actively looking at second-tier suppliers to fill that back order. So, Tony, I don't have an exact answer of when the back order is going to be lifted. It's unfortunate because it is a safety part, and it is one of those things that you probably should not be supplied used. But I think that there are sub-suppliers that manufacture seat belts, Garrett and some of the others for other companies. So it is Honda reaching out to those second-tier suppliers to see if they can fill that gap. And here's a good question: what suggestions do you have for collision shops to attract and retain talent in the midst of the ongoing technician shortage? This one hits a little close to home for me, because when my son left the Army after a couple of tours, he trained to be a collision technician. And while it was an excellent program and they trained him very well, they were pretty inflexible on where their need was. And so even though he was living in Colorado, they assigned him to a collision center in Florida. And that was a very expensive part of Florida. He ended up not taking that. I had encouraged him to look locally to get a job locally in Colorado at a collision repair shop, and he did not. I think that the retention really has to be around um, making that job as attractive as possible. Gain sharing. You're looking at uh, record productivity, and it's got to come back to rewarding the employees. Um, I wish I had a silver bullet for this situation, but I really don't. Um, and a question from Sean: any thoughts on why North and South Dakota have such high supply days? Yeah, there aren't a lot of manufacturing warehouses or parts warehouses, be it aftermarket or be it the PDCs. They cover through multiple states. They're a couple of states away, so it is truly trucking into those two states from surrounding states where the PDCs are for the OEs and where the distribution warehouses are for the aftermarket, that causes those somewhat remote rural states in having a delay, an additional delay. Question for Chris: do you have data on the percentage of recycled parts being used in collision repair compared to OE and aftermarket? Has there been an increase since COVID? And what do I expect to see over the next year? We do. We have seen an increase in aftermarket and recycled, in no small part due to the fact that there were some stamping and supply issues from the OEs. And I believe that's what encouraged one of the large insurance companies to ease their aftermarket parts policy, was because they were finding that the OE supply was not to the level it had been before COVID. So it really has been COVID related. I talked to a couple of OEs with stamping plants in Mexico. They were shipping uh, 10 plus trucks a day out of their stamping plant. During the height of COVID, that was 3. So you saw these, normal high volume collision parts not being delivered to the US to their PDCs in the volumes it had been before COVID. So there is an increase in aftermarket and recycled part supply and part sales, and it is because of the lack of new OEM part sales. Ray has asked, any early data on showing how the aftermarket reband OEM mix changes when State Farm opens up ordering? Maybe Oklahoma and Texas data. Don't have any data that we can share just yet. And I believe there will be a change in the overall market, because that's a big player there. But nothing that is available yet. Question from Ilya: are insurance rates different from EVs versus ICE vehicles? Interestingly enough, despite the fact that they're incredibly fast, there really isn't a significant increase, and that is in some part due to the fact of the way that most insurance companies rate a vehicle. If they have an EV vehicle that has never existed before, they usually rely on a symbol of a similar previously produced ICE vehicle. So, for example, um, the ID4, they look at the price and say, hey, it's an all-wheel drive SUV. It's about the same price as the VW Atlas, so we will assign the symboling and the price based on that. So it may be a situation, as we get more of these vehicles through the pipeline and the insurance companies see what the loss repair costs are, that it changes. Question from Stark: any thoughts or insights on the issue of backordered structural adhesive by the 2 largest European manufacturers? This is also one of those big sought after pieces, and it is just a hangover from Omicron and the continued outages in various cities that were producing these structural adhesives. It is a temporary sort of lag from the shutdowns that were happening at the various factories. Good news is, I guess, that it is short-lived because most of Europe is fully back and functioning um, at those manufacturing plants. So it should be, hopefully, we'll get them, produced and delivered into the U.S. Question from Brandon: have you heard of any company specializing in disposal of EV batteries, specifically ruptured ones like the Tesla that was in the news yesterday? Supposedly, they had to dig a hole and fill it with water to put the fire out. Are we forgetting about potential groundwater contamination from this? This is one of those unintended consequences and unintended or unknowns as we go forward. What Brandon's referring to is a Tesla with a ruptured battery, and it took hundreds and hundreds of gallons of water to put the battery out. The interesting thing about the EV recycling is that Tesla, when the vehicle is at total loss, actually sabotages the battery so it's not available on the aftermarket or on through recyclers. And there really isn't that I know of, and maybe someone with connections at EV companies who's listening in can send me their OE step by step on what they do with batteries, both in the event of a fire from an accident and a ruptured battery, and then what they do with end of life or total loss batteries. All right, folks, that looks like the end of questions that we have. I really, really appreciate it. And again, am humbled that such a large number of you have decided to spend part of your day with me. Again, when you register, you don't have to attend live. We will be sending a recording out of this broadcast after the fact, along with the deck. So again, I want to thank you for your time. Stay tuned. We will send out the invite for the Q2 webinar in a month or two. So well in advance, so you get a chance to register, block out your calendar if you'd like. But again, thank you so much and have a wonderful day. Thanks, folks. Bye-bye.